You'll regret this. I will own this house, and you'll be living in a ditch. Those were the last words Brenda ever screamed at me. They echoed across the stunned silence of the community clubhouse, her face a contorted mask of purple rage as two sheriff's deputies guided her, none too gently, toward the exit. The metallic click of handcuffs seemed to punctuate the end of her reign. It was a sound more satisfying than I ever could have imagined. But this story doesn't start at the end. It starts much quieter, with a man, a barn, and a couple of cats just trying to find some peace. My name is Arthur Penhaligon. I'm a structural engineer, and for the better part of 30 years, my life was about blueprints, stress calculations, and the quiet satisfaction of making old things strong again. My wife, Sarah, used to say I could find the soul of a building. She was the artist, the one who saw beauty. I was the one who made sure that beauty didn't collapse. We were a good team. When I lost her to cancer, the world lost its color, and my own foundation felt like it was cracking under a load it was never designed to bear. The big house we'd shared felt cavernous and empty. Every room held a ghost. After a year of rattling around in it, I knew I needed a change. I needed a project, something to pour my grief and my skills into. That's when I found the old Henderson place, just on the edge of a sprawling, meticulously planned community called Willow Creek Estates. It was an oddity. The property was a 5-acre holdout from the original farmland, complete with a listing, sway-backed farmhouse and, most importantly, a magnificent, dilapidated 100-year-old barn. The developer had clearly wanted the land, but Oldman Henderson had refused to sell the parcel with the barn on it. So they built their perfect little suburb around it, an island of history in a sea of beige siding and manicured lawns. When the property finally went on the market after Henderson passed, I bought it within a week. The house was secondary, the barn was my sanctuary. Its timber frame was a masterpiece of mortise and tenon joinery, its bones were good, and I could already see it restored, my workshop on the ground floor, a quiet loft for reading above. It was a project that would take years, a perfect place to rebuild. The other residents of Willow Creek kept their distance at first, which suited me fine. I wasn't looking for neighborhood barbecues, I was looking for solitude. My only real companions in those early days were the cats. They came with the barn, a pair of semi-feral hunters who had clearly been running the place for years. A grizzled old tomcat with one notched ear I named General Sterling, and a sleek, shadow-black female I called Midnight. Sarah had always loved cats, and feeding them, earning their slow, cautious trust, felt like a small way of keeping her memory alive. They were good company, quiet, independent, and brutally efficient at their job. I soon learned why their job was so important. The old farmland was teeming with field mice, voles, and the occasional bold rat. General Sterling and Midnight were a furry little pest control team, and they kept the barn and the area around my house clear. I had them trapped, neutered, vaccinated, and returned. They weren't house pets, but they were my tenants, and we had an arrangement that worked. I had been there for about 6 months, happily covered in sawdust and lost in my work, when I first encountered the force of nature that was Brenda, president of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association. She appeared at the edge of my property line one Saturday afternoon, standing with her hands on her hips, her posture radiating an authority she clearly felt was absolute. She was a woman in her late 50s, with a helmet of blonde hair that looked like it could deflect small arms fire and a pantsuit the color of a faded highlighter. "Mr. Penhaligon," she announced, her voice carrying across the lawn like a drill sergeant's. It wasn't a greeting, it was an accusation. I shut off my belt sander and walked over, wiping my hands on a rag. "Just Arthur is fine," I said, offering a neighborly smile that wasn't returned. "I am Brenda, president of the HOA," she said, as if announcing her royal title. "We have a problem." "Oh." She pointed a perfectly manicured finger toward the barn, where General Sterling was sunning himself on a hay bale. That is the problem. You are harboring strays. It is a clear violation of Bylaw 17, subsection C, nuisance animals. I blinked. "Ma'am, those are barn cats. They live here. They keep the rodent population down. They are a health hazard," she sniffed, her nose wrinkling as if she'd smelled something foul. "They are unsightly and carry diseases. I've had complaints from neighbors about them roaming. They need to be removed." I kept my tone even. I was used to dealing with difficult clients and fussy historical preservation boards. Patience was part of my toolkit. I can assure you they are not a health hazard. They've been fully vetted by a veterinarian. They're neutered and vaccinated. I have the paperwork. They mostly stay on my 5 acres. Brenda's eyes narrowed. It was clear that facts were an unwelcome intrusion into her narrative. The bylaws are the bylaws, Arthur. The rules are what keep this community pristine and desirable. They protect our property values. Uncontrolled animals do not fit that vision. You'll receive an official notice. You have 14 days to rectify the situation, $100 fine. She turned on her heel and marched away, leaving me standing there in a cloud of sawdust and disbelief. $100. For what? For 2 cats quietly doing the job nature intended for them. It was absurd. I shook my head, figuring it was just a case of a power-tripping HOA president needing to flex her authority. I'd send her a polite letter, include copies of the vet records, and that would be the end of it. Oh, how wrong I was. That wasn't the end. That was the first shot in a war I never wanted to fight. My polite letter, complete with the vet records laminated for durability, was met with a second notice. The fine was now $200 for failure to comply. A note was scrawled at the bottom in an aggressive, loopy script. Paperwork does not make them less of a nuisance. I tried calling her. The number listed for the HOA president went to a voicemail that was, predictably, full. I decided to try a direct approach and attend the next monthly HOA meeting. I figured a calm, rational, face-to-face explanation in front of other residents would surely clear this up. It seemed like a simple misunderstanding, amplified by someone who clearly had too much time on her hands. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a sterile room that smelled of air freshener and quiet desperation. About 15 residents were scattered among the folding chairs, looking uniformly bored. Brenda sat at the head table, flanked by a nervous-looking treasurer and a secretary who was furiously knitting. Brenda ran the meeting like a dictator overseeing a puppet government. She spoke, and everyone else nodded. When the floor was opened for new business, I stood up and introduced myself. I calmly explained the situation, that I was the new owner of the Henderson property, that the cats were part of the Barnes ecosystem, that they were healthy and managed, and that they provided a valuable service to the entire area by controlling pests. So you admit, Brenda cut in, her voice dripping with condescension, that your property is a source of pests? No, I said, refusing to be flustered. I'm saying all rural and semi-rural properties have rodent populations. It's a fact of life. The cats are the solution, not the problem. An older man in the back piped up. I've seen those cats. They don't bother anybody. My wife thinks they're handsome. Brenda shot him a look that could curdle milk. Frank, your opinion is noted, but it is irrelevant. The bylaws are designed to maintain a standard of living. This isn't a farm. This is an elite community. The arrogance was breathtaking. She spoke as if we were living in Beverly Hills instead of a cookie-cutter development in the middle of nowhere. The fine stands, she declared, banging a small gavel that seemed absurdly out of place. And it will double for every week of non-compliance. Next item. I sat down, my jaw tight. It wasn't about the money. It was the principle. It was the sheer, unadulterated bullheadedness of the woman. I saw then that logic was a tool she had no use for. Her power wasn't derived from reason, it was derived from the unquestioning obedience of her bored or intimidated neighbors. My challenging her was not a disagreement, it was an act of insurrection. The escalation began in earnest after that meeting. My name appeared on the Community Watch section of the monthly HOA newsletter, citing my property for ongoing violations. Passive-aggressive posts started appearing on the community Facebook page, which Brenda administered with an iron fist. A reminder to all residents, feeding stray animals is not only against the rules, it attracts vermin and disease. Please be a responsible neighbor. Then came the calls to animal control. I'd be in the barn, working on reinforcing a beam, and a white van would pull up my long driveway. The first time, the officer was a young guy who looked apologetic. Got a call about feral, possibly rabid cats, sir. I showed him the vet records. I pointed out the clipped ear on General Sterling, the universal sign of a TNR, trap neuter return, cat. He sighed. Figured as much. We get these calls from her all the time. Anything from a dog barking to a squirrel looking at her funny. Sorry to bother you. He came out 2 more times that month, with the same result. The 3rd time, he just gave me a weary wave from the end of my driveway and drove off. Brenda's campaign was becoming a nuisance not just for me, but for county services. The fines kept coming, stuffed into my mailbox. They were up to $800 now. I wasn't paying them, of course. I was filing them away in a folder labeled Brenda's Folly, but her harassment was a constant, low-grade hum of annoyance, like a fluorescent light that won't stop buzzing. It was stealing the peace I had come here to find. The turning point, the moment my patient, methodical approach cracked like cheap concrete, came on a Tuesday morning. I went out to the barn with bowls of food and called for the cats. Midnight came trotting out of the shadows, but the general was nowhere to be seen. This was unusual. He was a creature of habit, and breakfast was his favorite habit. I searched the property, calling his name. I felt a knot of dread tightening in my stomach. After an hour, I found it near the edge of my property, tucked behind a stand of bushes that bordered the manicured lawn of Brenda's closest ally, a woman named Carol. It was a live trap, a metal cage with a pressure plate. And inside, looking miserable and furious, was General Sterling. The door had been sprung, and there was a small bowl of tuna just inside. This wasn't an animal control trap. This was personal. Someone had come onto my property to trap my cat. I saw red. All the frustration, all the annoyance, coalesced into a cold, hard rage. They had crossed a line. You could fine me, you could badmouth me, but you did not mess with my animals. You did not mess with one of the few living things that brought me a sliver of joy. I carefully released the general, who shot me an indignant look before bolting back to the safety of the barn. I picked up the trap. It was a cheap model, the kind you could buy at any hardware store. As I carried it back to my workshop, the engineer in me took over, pushing the anger aside and replacing it with cold, calculating logic. Brenda had escalated. She had moved from bureaucratic harassment to direct action. She had trespassed and attempted to steal my property, because in my eyes, that's what the general was. This was no longer a disagreement. This was a war. And if there's one thing a structural engineer knows, it's that you don't win a war by arguing. You win by identifying the opponent's critical weaknesses and applying pressure until their entire structure fails. That afternoon, I put my barn restoration project on hold. I now had a new project. I called it Project Brenda, the objective, not just to win, but to achieve a state of what I termed structural poetic justice. I was going to use her own actions, her own obsession with control, as the load-bearing elements in her own downfall. My first step was to stop playing defense. I began my investigation. I spent that evening online, digging into the public records for Willow Creek Estates. I downloaded the full HOA covenants, the articles of incorporation, the county plat maps, and the property records for every house on Brenda's cul-de-sac. I read them all, line by line, the same way I would read a building code. Most of it was boilerplate nonsense, but I was looking for cracks. My professional life was about finding hidden flaws, hairline fractures in concrete, dry rot in a centuries-old beam, soil instability that no one else noticed. I applied the same mindset to Brenda. I started with her house. According to the county records, her property had a building permit for the original construction and one for a patio she'd added in 2015. Nothing else. That struck me as odd. From my own property, I had a clear view of the back of her house. It looked like it had a large finished room over the garage, with a prominent dormer window. That kind of addition, an attic conversion, almost always required a permit. It involved structural changes, electrical work, insulation, all things the county inspector would need to sign off on. The absence of a permit was a small crack, but it was a start. Next, I looked at the HOA's financials, which they were required to post online for members. They were a mess. The bookkeeping was amateurish, full of vague categories like community landscaping, clubhouse maintenance, and miscellaneous administrative. The numbers were round and suspiciously consistent. The landscaping budget, for example, was exactly $5,000 every single quarter. Real-world costs are never that neat. It smelled funny, like a cover-up. It was another crack. The real breakthrough, however, came from the plat maps and the original geological surveys of the area I dug up from the county archives. As I suspected, the entire development was built on what used to be the Henderson family's vast corn and hay fields. And tucked away in the surveyor's notes from the 1950s was a fascinating little detail. The area was known locally as Rat Creek Hollow because of its unusually dense and resilient population of Norway rats. The soil was sandy and perfect for burrowing, and the nearby creek provided a constant water source. Old Man Henderson, the notes mentioned, had controlled the population for decades using a legion of barn cats. I sat back in my chair, a slow smile spreading across my face. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a trowel. Brenda was fighting a war against the one thing that was protecting her pristine community from its natural state. She was trying to tear down the very flood barrier that was holding back a tide of rodents. And that's when the plan began to form. It wasn't just a plan, it was a structural analysis. Brenda was a poorly designed building, founded on arrogance and held together by the flimsy mortar of intimidation. My cats were a critical, load-bearing support column. What happens when you remove a critical support? The structure begins to fail. The plan, which I officially christened Project Rodentia, was beautiful in its simplicity. It would unfold in phases, each one designed to use Brenda's own actions to bring about her ruin. Phase 1, Strategic Retreat. I had to remove the cats. But I had to do it in a way that was public, documented, and made me look like the victim. I needed her to believe she had won a decisive victory. Phase 2, Observation and Documentation. With the primary predators gone, the local rodent population would inevitably begin to swell. Nature abhors a vacuum. They would start searching for new sources of food and shelter. I would be there to watch and record their every move. Phase 3, the infestation. Rats are smart. They would seek out the warmest, most accessible shelter. And what could be more inviting than a poorly constructed, unpermitted attic addition with shoddy ceiling and warm insulation? An addition on the home of the HOA president herself. Phase 4, Poetic Justice. I would use the evidence I gathered to expose her not just as a bully, but as a hypocrite and a fraud whose own actions had endangered the community she claimed to protect. Her unpermitted addition would be the lever, and her rat problem would be the fulcrum. It was a perfect plan, a piece of engineering as elegant as a well-designed truss. It was methodical, it was patient, and it was utterly devastating. First, I needed to set the trap. I purchased 4 high-resolution, motion-activated, night vision cameras. They were small, discreet, and wireless. I spent an afternoon placing them strategically. One was mounted high on my barn, camouflaged against the old wood, with a perfect view of the back of Brenda's house, focusing on her roofline and the dormer over the garage. Another was placed in a birdhouse, aimed at the strip of manicured lawn between our properties. The last 2 covered the approaches to my barn and house, just in case she decided to escalate her trespassing. Next came the most difficult part of the plan, the public removal of the cats. My heart ached at the thought, but I knew it was temporary. I called my cousin, who owned a small farm about 40 miles away, well outside the jurisdiction of any HOA. I explained the situation, and he laughed. So the general and his sidekick need to go on a little vacation. A witness protection program for cats. Consider it done, Arthur. They'll have plenty of mice to keep them busy here. The following Saturday, I put phase 1 into motion. I made sure to do it midday, when I knew people would be out gardening or washing their cars. I ostentatiously brought 2 large cat carriers out to my truck. Then I went into the barn. It took some coaxing and a lot of treats to get General Sterling and Midnight into the carriers. They were not happy. Their protests were loud and pitiful, which was perfect for my performance. As I loaded them into the cab of my truck, I saw Brenda watching from her perfectly clean kitchen window, a smug, triumphant smile on her face. Her ally Carol was watering her petunias and stopped to stare, her expression one of pure, vindictive satisfaction. I gave them a sad, defeated little wave. I wanted them to savor this. I wanted them to think they had broken me. I drove the cats out to my cousin's farm. They were grumpy, but once released into his barn, their hunter instincts took over. They were sniffing out the new territory within minutes. I knew they'd be fine. It's just for a little while, I told the general, scratching him behind his notched ear one last time. Think of it as a tactical redeployment. When I returned home, the silence on my property was deafening. The absence of the cats was a physical presence. It was the first time I truly felt alone since I'd moved in. But I pushed the feeling down. This was a necessary step. I settled in for phase 2. The waiting game. It didn't take long. For the first week, nothing happened. I checked the camera footage every morning over my coffee. It was mostly deer, the occasional raccoon, and Carol's poodle making a beeline for my prize-winning rose bushes. But in the second week, I saw the first signs. A single rat, sleek and fat, scurried along the foundation of Brenda's house in the dead of night. It paused, sniffed the air, and disappeared into a thick azalea bush right below her illegal dormer. A scout. A few nights later, there were 3 of them. The camera on my barn, with its clear view of her roof, captured one of them shimmying effortlessly up a downspout. It ran along the gutter, testing, searching. It found a small gap where the new dormer's siding met the old roofline, a gap no competent, licensed contractor would ever have left. It squeezed through and vanished. I almost cheered. It was working. The breach had been made. Over the next month, the activity escalated exponentially. My cameras recorded a nightly parade of rodents. They were using the downspout like a highway, treating the gap in her siding like a front door. They had found warmth, shelter, and a space free of predators. Brenda had, in effect, rolled out a welcome mat for the very vermin she claimed my cats were attracting. The first public sign of trouble came, as I knew it would, on the community Facebook page. It was a post from Brenda. "Attention Willow Creek residents," it began, in the aggressive all caps she favored. "It has come to my attention that we are experiencing a sudden and alarming increase in pests. I have seen rodents on my property. This is unacceptable. This is precisely the kind of filth that our bylaws are designed to prevent. We will be discussing emergency pest control measures at the next HOA meeting." The comments section was a goldmine of irony. "That's so strange," one neighbor wrote. "I haven't seen a mouse in my garage for years. Now I'm seeing them all the time. Ever since those barn cats disappeared, it's gotten worse," commented Frank, the man who had spoken up for me at the meeting. Brenda's reply was swift and autocratic. "This has nothing to do with the stray animals that were thankfully removed. This is likely due to poor sanitation from certain properties attracting them. All residents should ensure their trash cans are properly sealed." She was publicly acknowledging the problem, and in the same breath, trying to blame me for the mess she had created. It was a critical error. She was documenting her own incompetence. I saved screenshots of the entire thread and added them to my evidence folder. Project Rodentia was proceeding ahead of schedule. The stage was set for the next HOA meeting. This would be the first reveal, the first application of pressure to the cracked foundation of her authority. I prepared my presentation with the same precision I would use for a proposal to a city planning commission. I created a simple timeline in a PowerPoint presentation. Slide 1, a picture of my barn with General Sterling sunning himself, dated 2 months prior. Slide 2, a copy of Brenda's first violation notice. Slide 3, a screenshot of her triumphant post celebrating that the stray animal problem has been handled. Then came the data. A chart showing the exponential increase in motion camera triggers on my property, cross-referenced with date and time. And then, the videos. A highlight reel of the nightly rodent activity. Rats climbing her downspout. Rats disappearing into the gap in her roof. Rats peering out of her attic vent. I even had a thermal camera attachment I used for my work to detect heat loss in old buildings. I had used it on her dormer one cold night. The video showed a dozen small, bright hot spots huddled together in the wall cavity. Her attic was a rat condominium. I arrived at the clubhouse for the meeting feeling a calm, cold sense of purpose. Brenda, as expected, opened the meeting by addressing her number 1 priority, the unprecedented pest crisis. "I am proposing an emergency assessment of $200 per household," she announced, "to hire a premium extermination service to fumigate the entire community. We must eradicate this problem before it destroys our property values." A few people grumbled at the cost. Frank raised his hand. "Brenda, I hate to say it, but we never had this problem when Arthur's cats were around. Maybe the solution isn't spending thousands on poison, but letting him bring them back." Brenda's face tightened. "We will not be revisiting the stray animal issue. This is a new problem that requires a modern solution." This was my cue. I stood up. Brenda, I may have some insight into the source of this new problem. All eyes turned to me. Brenda glared. What is it, Arthur? More complaints. Not complaints, I said, pulling a small projector from my bag and connecting it to my laptop. Data. I projected my timeline onto the wall. I walked them through it, my voice calm and matter-of-fact. The before picture. The violation notice. The after picture of an empty hay bale. Then I showed them the chart of rodent activity. I could hear murmurs ripple through the room. As you can see, I said, the pest problem began almost to the day after the natural pest controllers were removed from the ecosystem. But the question is, where did they go? I clicked to the next slide. It was a crystal clear, night vision video of a rat climbing her downspout. There was an audible gasp in the room. I let the video play, showing the rat disappearing into the gap in her roof. This footage, I said, was taken last night. At your house, Brenda. Brenda shot to her feet, her face turning a shade of crimson I had only ever seen in freshly mixed paint. This is an outrage. This is an invasion of my privacy. You have been spying on me. This is illegal. My cameras are on my property, pointing at areas visible from my property, I replied calmly. It's perfectly legal. The camera is there for my own security, which I felt was necessary after someone came onto my land and illegally trapped my cat. I looked around the room. The simple fact is, the rats aren't a community-wide problem. They are a localized infestation. They found a warm, safe place to breed, free from predators. I clicked to the final slide, the thermal image of her dormer, glowing with the heat signatures of dozens of rodents. Right here. The room was silent for a moment, and then it erupted into chaos. People were shouting questions. Brenda was screaming, a torrent of denials and threats. He doctored it. It's fake. He's trying to get out of paying his fines. I'll sue you into oblivion, Arthur. I'll have you arrested. She was losing control, and everyone saw it. Her authority, built on a carefully crafted image of pristine order, was crumbling. By trying to pin the problem on the community, she had inadvertently exposed herself as its source. She had lost her credibility, but I knew she hadn't lost her power. Not yet. A cornered animal is the most dangerous, and I knew her retaliation would be vicious. The trap had been sprung, but the fight was far from over. Brenda's public humiliation lit a fire under her. The next few weeks were a blur of escalating, unhinged attacks. She was no longer hiding behind bylaws and newsletters, this was a personal vendetta. First, she filed a police report against me for harassment and illegal surveillance. A detective came out to my house, a weary-looking man who had clearly drawn the short straw. I calmly showed him the placement of my cameras, the footage of the trap on my property that prompted me to install them, and a copy of the state laws regarding surveillance of areas with no reasonable expectation of privacy. Your house is visible from the street, sir, the detective told me later over the phone. There's no case here. Frankly, it sounds like she's the one harassing you. He advised me to document everything, which I was already doing with meticulous care. When the police report failed, she went for my livelihood. She found out I was a licensed structural engineer and filed a lengthy, rambling complaint with the state licensing board. She accused me of running an unlicensed construction business out of my home and claimed my barn restoration was an unsafe, unpermitted structure that posed a clear and present danger to the community. This was a more serious threat. An investigation by the licensing board, even a frivolous one, could be a black mark on my 30-year career. I had to hire a lawyer to draft a formal response, complete with copies of all my permits for the barn work, my engineering credentials, and a detailed explanation of the situation. It was a costly and time-consuming distraction, designed purely to inflict pain. While that was being handled, she launched a smear campaign on the community Facebook page that was breathtaking in its dishonesty. She accused me of being a recluse with a grudge, of intentionally breeding rats and releasing them on her property to get revenge. She posted grainy, out-of-context photos of me carrying bags of fertilizer for my garden, implying they were bags of rat poison or something more sinister. She was trying to paint me as the villain, a dangerous eccentric who was threatening their peaceful suburban paradise. Some of her cronies joined in, but for the most part, the community was silent. People had seen her meltdown at the meeting. They had seen my evidence. Her narrative was starting to sound desperate and unhinged. She was digging her own grave deeper with every post, but that didn't make it any less stressful for me. My peaceful retreat had become a battlefield, and my name was being dragged through the mud. I knew I needed a final, undeniable piece of evidence to end this. My surveillance footage proved where the rats were going, but it didn't prove why her house was so inviting. It didn't prove the shoddy, unpermitted construction I suspected. For that, I needed a source from the inside. I needed a whistleblower. And then, as if on cue, one fell right into my lap. I was in my front yard one evening, inspecting my roses, when a beat-up work van pulled into my driveway. A man in his late 20s, wearing a frayed electrician's union t-shirt, got out. He looked nervous, glancing over his shoulder toward Brenda's house. "Arthur Penhaligon?" he asked, his voice low. "That's me. My name is Mark. I'm Brenda's son-in-law." I raised an eyebrow. This was unexpected. "Okay. Look, I know this is weird," he stammered, wringing his hands. "But I saw what happened at that HOA meeting. My wife, Jenny, she told me all about it. And what Brenda is doing to you. It ain't right. The stuff she's posting online. It's crazy." I just listened, waiting. "The thing is," he continued, taking a deep breath, "about that room over her garage. The one with the rats. I'm familiar with it," I said dryly. "I wired it," he confessed, his face flushing with shame. "This was a few years ago, when I was just starting out, trying to get my own business off the ground. She offered me cash to do it on the side. No permits, no inspection. She said it was just for a hobby room, and that permits were government robbery. This was it. The final piece of the puzzle. She bought the cheapest materials you can imagine," Mark went on, the words tumbling out of him now. "The insulation is the wrong R-value, the drywall is wafer thin. And the guys she hired to frame it and put on the siding. They were just some day laborers she paid under the table. They slapped it together in a weekend. I told her the gaps they were leaving weren't sealed right, that she'd have problems with moisture and pests. She told me to mind my own business and just do the wiring. Do you have any proof of this?" I asked, my voice steady, trying to conceal the excitement building in my chest. Mark nodded. "That's the thing. She stiffed me on the last $500 of the job. Said my work was slow. I was so mad, I kept everything. I've got photos on my phone of the framing before the drywall went up. You can see the shoddy work, the gaps around the window frame. I've got receipts for the cheap materials she made me buy. And I've got text messages from her telling me to keep it off the books." He pulled out his phone and showed me. It was all there. Photos of exposed studs with daylight visible through the exterior sheathing. Texts from Brenda explicitly stating "No permits. This is our little secret." It was a slam dunk. "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. Mark sighed, a wave of exhaustion washing over his face. "Because I'm sick of it. She controls every aspect of my wife's life. She badgers us for money, even though she lives in that big house. And after she stiffed me, she had the nerve to go around telling people I was an incompetent electrician. She almost ruined my reputation before it even started. Seeing her do the same thing to you. I'm just done. She needs to be stopped." He forwarded me all the photos, the screenshots of the texts, and a copy of the receipt for the materials. But he wasn't finished. "There's something else," he said, his voice dropping even lower. "Those community landscaping fees in the HOA budget. That $5,000 every quarter." "I've seen it," I said. "The name of the company is Prestige Landscaping Solutions. It's a shell corporation. She set it up herself. There is no company. The money goes from the HOA account straight into her personal account. She's been embezzling from the HOA for at least 5 years. That's how she paid for the patio, the new kitchen. Maybe even that attic room." My mind reeled. This went so much further than I had imagined. It wasn't just about a petty abuse of power anymore. This was felony-level crime. Trespassing, harassment, unlicensed construction, building code violations, tax evasion, and now embezzlement. Brenda wasn't just a bully, she was a career criminal in a pastel pantsuit. I thanked Mark profusely. He looked relieved, as if a great weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "Just bring her down," he said before getting in his van and driving away. I now had an arsenal. The next morning, I didn't call the local police. I didn't complain to the HOA. I went over her head, straight to the top. I compiled all my evidence into separate, meticulously organized digital folders. Folder 1, for the county building inspector, contained Mark's photos, his testimony, my thermal imaging, and a detailed structural engineer's report I wrote myself, outlining the probable code violations, the fire risk from the shoddy wiring, and the public health hazard from the rodent infestation. Folder 2, for the district attorney's office, contained the evidence of embezzlement, the screenshots of the smear campaign, the police report she filed against me, and a detailed timeline of her escalating harassment. I made my calls. I sent my emails. I explained the situation calmly and professionally to each department. This was no longer a neighborhood squabble, it was a matter of public safety and financial crime. And suddenly, the wheels of a bureaucracy far more powerful than Brenda's little HOA began to turn. The final showdown was, fittingly, an event of Brenda's own making. Feeling the pressure, and with her public support evaporating, she made one last, desperate move. She called an emergency HOA meeting with a single item on the agenda, a vote to invoke a rarely used bylaw to expel a member for conduct detrimental to the community. She was trying to have me legally kicked out of my own home. She had to post notice of the meeting 10 days in advance. That was all the time I needed. I spoke with the lead investigator from the DA's office and the chief building inspector for the county. They assured me their own investigations would be complete by then. They agreed to attend the meeting. I also spent that week talking to my neighbors. I went door to door, not with accusations, but with facts. I showed Frank the evidence of the embezzlement. I showed the nice couple across the street the proof of the unpermitted construction. I showed everyone the threats and lies from the Facebook page. I wasn't asking them to pick a side, I was just showing them the truth. By the time the meeting night arrived, the tide of public opinion had turned completely. The clubhouse was packed. It was the best attended HOA meeting in Willow Creek history. People were standing along the walls. There was a palpable tension in the air, like the static before a lightning strike. Brenda sat at the head table, looking smug. She clearly thought this was her moment of ultimate triumph, the public execution of her nemesis. She had no idea she was the one walking to the gallows. I took a seat in the front row. A few minutes after the meeting started, 3 people quietly entered and stood at the back of the room, a man in a crisp suit from the DA's office, a woman in a county logo polo shirt holding a thick file, and a uniformed sheriff's deputy. Brenda didn't even notice them. She banged her gavel. This emergency meeting is now in session. The sole purpose of this meeting is to vote on the expulsion of Arthur Penhaligon for his continued campaign of harassment against the board, his deliberate creation of a public health crisis, and his flagrant disregard for our community's bylaws and standards. She then launched into a 15-minute tirade, a greatest hits of all her lies and accusations. She painted me as a monster who had terrorized her and the community. She was dramatic. She was self-righteous. She was, for the last time, utterly in control of her narrative. When she finished, she looked at the crowd, expecting applause. She was met with dead silence. And now, she said, a slight tremor of uncertainty in her voice, we will vote. Before we do, I said, standing up. I believe I have the right to address the accusations. Brenda sneered. Fine. You have 5 minutes. Try not to bore us with any more of your fake videos. I won't need videos, I said, walking to the front of the room. The truth is simpler than that. I turned to the community. For the last 6 months, I began, my voice clear and steady, I have been accused of being a bad neighbor. I've been fined, harassed, slandered, and had my property trespassed upon. And all of it began because of 2 cats. 2 cats who, as it turns out, were the only thing protecting this community from a pest problem that has existed here for decades. I looked directly at Brenda. You accused me of creating a health crisis. The truth is, the crisis is in your attic. An attic that was built without permits, by unlicensed contractors, in flagrant violation of county building codes. An attic that, according to an expert witness, is a fire hazard and a breeding ground for the very rats you're blaming on me. The woman from the county, the building inspector, chose that moment to step forward. "Brenda," she said, her voice carrying authority. "I am from the County Permits and Inspections Department. We have conducted an investigation. The room over your garage is an illegal structure. It is not up to code and poses a significant safety risk. You are being served with this." She walked up and handed Brenda a thick envelope. "That is a notice of violation and an order to demolish the illegal addition within 90 days at your own expense. Your home's certificate of occupancy is hereby suspended until the violation is rectified." Brenda stared at the envelope as if it were a snake. Her face went pale. But I wasn't finished. "You accused me of harassment," I continued, my voice growing stronger. "But you filed a false police report against me. You filed a malicious and fraudulent complaint with my professional licensing board. You have used the community's official communication channels to slander me." I turned my attention to the budget report, which was projected on the wall behind her. "And finally, you called for a $200 assessment on every family here to pay for pest control. But what about all the money you've already collected? What about the $5,000 every quarter that goes to a company called Prestige Landscaping Solutions?" At the mention of the name, the men in the suit from the DA's office began to walk slowly toward the head table. "It turns out," I said, my voice ringing through the silent room, "that Prestige Landscaping Solutions doesn't exist. It's a shell company. And the money, over $100,000 over the last 5 years, has been going directly from the HOA bank account into your personal checking account, Brenda." A collective gasp went through the room. Frank yelled, "You've been stealing from us." Brenda finally snapped. The mask of composure shattered into a million pieces. "Lies. These are all lies. He's a liar. You can't prove any of it." The investigator from the DA's office was now standing right beside her. "Ma'am," he said calmly. "We can. We have bank records. We have a sworn statement from your son-in-law. We have everything." He gestured to the deputy at the back of the room, who started walking forward. "Brenda," the investigator said, his voice devoid of all emotion. "You are under arrest for multiple counts of felony embezzlement, wire fraud, and theft by deception." Her breakdown was spectacular. It was a full-scale, 5-alarm public meltdown. She screamed, she cried, she swore. She swiped all the papers off the table, sending her little gavel clattering to the floor. She accused me, her son-in-law, the board, the entire community of conspiring against her. It was a desperate, pathetic display of a tyrant realizing her reign was over. The deputy was professional and firm. He took her arm. "Ma'am, you need to come with me." As he cuffed her hands behind her back, she locked eyes with me one last time. Her face was a mess of tears and fury. That's when she screamed it. "You'll regret this. I will own this house, and you'll be living in a ditch." The threat was hollow, impotent. Everyone knew it. As the deputy led her out of the clubhouse, the room was silent for a beat, and then someone started to clap. Then another, and another, until the entire room was filled with applause. It wasn't for me. It was for the end of the fear and intimidation she had ruled with for so long. The aftermath was swift and decisive. Brenda's case was airtight. Faced with the mountain of evidence, she took a plea deal. She was sentenced to 3 years in state prison, with a restitution order for the full amount she had embezzled from the HOA. Her house, with its condemned illegal addition and the liens placed on it, was seized and sold at auction to cover the debts. She lost everything. The Willow Creek HOA was dissolved by a unanimous vote the following month. We replaced it with a simple neighborhood cooperative, with minimal rules focused only on maintaining the shared spaces. The oppressive atmosphere lifted like a fog. People started talking to each other again. Frank was elected the new co-op coordinator, and his first official act was to draft a formal letter of apology to me on behalf of the community. My life returned to a quiet rhythm. The complaint against my engineering license was dismissed as baseless. Mark, the son-in-law, started his own successful electrical business, and I made sure to hire him for the final wiring on my barn restoration. He never took a dime for it. About a week after Brenda was sentenced, I drove out to my cousin's farm. General Sterling and Midnight were sleek, fat, and happy, but they seemed to recognize the sound of my truck. I loaded them into their carriers, and this time, they seemed to know they were going home. When I released them back in the barn, the general did a slow, deliberate patrol of the perimeter, sniffing everything, reclaiming his territory. Midnight immediately leaped up to the hayloft, her favorite vantage point. They were back where they belonged. I finished the barn that fall. It was beautiful, stronger, and more stable than it had been in a century. The ground floor was my workshop, filled with the scent of sawdust and linseed oil. The loft was my library, a quiet sanctuary with a comfortable armchair overlooking my 5 acres of peace. Sometimes I sit up there in the evening, with a book in my lap and a cat purring nearby, and I look out across the neighborhood. I see the lights of other homes, and I think about the strange, ugly war I was forced to fight. I never wanted to be a hero or a giant slayer. I just wanted to be left alone to heal and to build. But I learned that sometimes, the only way to protect your peace is to go to war for it. Brenda thought the world could be controlled through rules and intimidation. She didn't understand that some things, like nature and justice, have a structure all their own. You can try to fight them, but in the end, they always win. Her house of cards was built on a rotten foundation, and all I did was remove one support and wait for the inevitable collapse. It was, in its own way, a perfect piece of engineering. And my property values, I'm happy to report, have never been better.